Stacy, I'll bounce it to you if you had anything you wanted to add or.
No, well, I was going to talk a little bit about kind of like when we decided to officially roll it out. So like Jason was talking about, his group was one of the coalition of the willing, one of the first groups that was like, all right, we'll try this. Like, let's see how it goes. And we had about 12 units across campus from a variety of different places that we piloted Collaboratory with for about 4 months. And our goal was to get 100 activities in Collaboratory from these different units before we shared it with a wider audience at NC State. So between January and March, that's what we did. We worked with these 12 groups. We learned so much from them. And I think that was a really important piece for us, is to kind of have groups that were willing to get into the weeds with us. And, it's one of those, like, you don't know what you don't know, like, until you actually start doing it, right? So we had talked about it and planned a lot, and it was like, okay, we got to make this jump at some point. And so that's what we did. And like, so grateful for groups like Jason's that worked through us. And we got to March and we had a little over 100 activities in. We had 81 faculty and staff who were part of those activities, and about, I think, 7 out of our 10 colleges. So we had we felt like it was, clearly just the tip of the iceberg at NC State because there's so much engagement, but it felt fairly representative to us. And most importantly, as we were looking for units that were interested in being part of this pilot, we were specifically keeping in mind the concerns and worries that we had heard from people as we were doing like our little roadshow going around, right? So people would maybe say to us, okay, I don't think it's going to work with extension, which is, part of our land grant mission, which is a lot of engagement. Or people might say, okay, we've got this, entrepreneurial group that we don't think it would work with, things like that. And so we really kept that in mind as we were building the pilot, because we wanted to make sure it did work for those groups and that it was something that NC State could do successfully. So we did a soft launch in March, which was exciting and kind of brought us a whole new group of people, right? We shared it to a wider audience at NC State. And since then, it's just been growing to more people, which is great.
Yeah, I just to follow up on that, I'm curious, Stacy, if you could speak a bit to like you spoke to the tipping point, right? Like when it felt doable to share more across the institution once you had that kind of capacity or enough momentum to feel like it was fully or somewhat representative on campus. And when you spoke about like some of the challenges that you ran into, like with extension or those entrepreneurial groups or just other individual faculty or staff that might think of their engagement differently or might define it as differently. I'm curious if you could speak a bit to how NC State chooses to define community engagement, or like kind of what the umbrella of that is, either broadly in your case, and how those different stakeholders view their engagement, how that kind of impacted your implementation.
That's a great question. So one of the things we heard when we started talking to faculty and staff were kind of to what Samantha was talking about before, that people felt really isolated, and they often talked about being in silos doing this work. And so we also knew that we had good ideas of like pockets of engagement at NC State, but we couldn't really tell the story of the whole university. Like we couldn't see the landscape of it. We could just see pieces of it. So we were really intentional in having a very broad definition of engagement. We wanted and still want everyone at NC State who is doing something with external neighborhoods, organizations, government agencies, for-profit, right, to find a place in Collaboratory. That might change over time, but right now that's been our approach. Like we want to get a handle on what's going on and help build a culture by helping people see where they belong in it. So that's been the way we have gone about that. We've also, I would say we've been a little bit of a mix of like a top-down, bottom-up approach. We've done a lot of talking with people in kind of senior administration levels to let them know what's going on and hear particularly how they want to use the data or what it might be helpful for. But a lot of our energy the past few months has been more on like the grassroots level. And I think there's two things there. One is like, as we think about how can we use this tool, not just for data, but for building a culture of engagement, there's two things. One is this whole idea like that Jason was talking about building relationships. Like And I think community engagement by its very nature, people who go into this are often relationship people, so this works particularly well. But we have spent a lot of time kind of meeting people where they're at. So again, that means people have different ideas of what engagement is. They have different ways of measuring whether it's good or not, all of that. And we've really met them where they're at and said, tell us about it, right? Tell us about how you think about it, what matters to you. And I think that has been really key. And so doing just, a lot of listening and meeting people where they're at. One of the things we've done too, very intentionally, is ask people what they want to get out of Collaboratory. And at a place like NC State, it varies greatly. So there's groups like Jason's at the Science House that love the idea of community members external being able to see what they're doing, right? We have a lot of teaching faculty who are really excited about Collaboratory because they want to be able to document their engagement for promotion and tenure, right? We have just yesterday I was talking to a new faculty member who wants to do something with clean water and wants to use it to find a community partner. So there are a lot of different reasons people want to use it. And we have really done our best to build a plan for them and prioritize the data that we help them get in and help teach them how to use it based on what they need. So it hasn't just been hey, this is how we want you to use it. It's been very much what do you need it for and how can we help you? And I think the last thing I just want to say too is those conversations in terms of building a culture that our graduate student team and that even Jason has with his team and Quasi and Samantha, those conversations, and I was so surprised by this, are part of what's building the culture of engagement, right? Because in each one of those conversations, we can have really fascinating discussions about how does NC State think about engagement, how, and kind of move that needle forward. And we actually have had quite a few faculty members who, after they're done with the process, are actually going through the process of putting my engagement in Collaboratory has made me think differently about some of the things I do. And maybe I want to, start prioritizing some other things. So that's kind of neat to see the culture growing from the grassroots level in that way.
What advice, knowing, kind of where you've come from in the last year, what advice do you have for other institutions that might be where you were a year ago or 2 or 3 years ago, who are either, currently or either aspirationally working to capture community engagement data and to really use it on their campuses? So any type of advice from all of your different perspectives, I think would be incredibly helpful.
Okay, I think my biggest piece of advice, I feel like I shared a little bit of that, but I think my biggest piece of advice would be that at some point you just have to take the leap with a system. I kind of like Samantha was talking about, there had been talk for many years about what are we going to do. And I think at some point you just realize there's no perfect system. We love Collaboratory, but nothing's perfect, right? And so I think just getting things going and getting some momentum and energy has been really helpful. And that's not just to say you shouldn't give it some thought and be intentional about it, but at some point it's just time to get started and see what happens. And
you're really giving momentum to a lot of folks here. I'm gonna transition now a bit and just kind of look at the chat, and I've seen a few questions that I'll just post to the group. Stacy, I'll put this one to you first because I know you do a lot of work around. We had some questions around data entry or how data is being entered into Collaboratory for other people or for other units, and would love for you to share a bit about the grad students that you work with, the faculty, staff, admins that you work with, and what your process really has been for leveraging the proxy feature, which you all have done very well.
Sure. We definitely rely on our graduate student team to proxy or create activities on behalf of faculty and staff. I would say 90% of our faculty and staff choose that option for us to create it for them. The other 10% do it themselves and enjoy doing that, which is great too. We give people both options. We've kind of gotten it down to a science. We started not really knowing the most efficient way to create activities for other people. And we've looked at all sorts of possibilities, but basically our process right now is that we have what we call a pipeline list, which is kind of like a snowball method, right? Kind of back to that grassroots approach. Every time we talk to a faculty member, we say, hey, give us 5 or 6 names of other people we should talk to. And we also are constantly reading, Twitter and social media and news articles and things from the university, just to kind of look for breadcrumbs of where engagement is going on. And what happens is we look at that list. It's divided up among our graduate student teams, mainly based on just colleges, because it's easiest for us. So everybody has kind of a couple assigned colleges. And we do a lot of like mining and scraping data first. So back to that point about reducing the burden on faculty and staff, we try to see what we can find on our own. And we have gotten so much better with this over time. In the beginning, we kind of would look at CVs and articles and annual reports and be like, I don't know. But now that we're much more familiar with the landscape of things, it's easier for us to kind of put puzzle pieces together and create a good activity on our own. And then what we do is we reach out to the faculty member and we meet with them. And we have a really high response rate. We were shocked by this. I think it's about 80% of faculty who we reach out to, like with a cold email, actually respond. And they generally love talking to us. Like it is like when we meet with them, it's like they have just been waiting to like share their story of engagement and love talking to us about it. So that is good. And we kind of fill in like the missing blanks that we couldn't get on our own. With some people, it's more than others. And then they, claim the activity and that's done. And so far that's worked pretty well for us. That was really in the weeds, but I figure whoever asked that wanted to be in the weeds, because I know I wish somebody would have told me that a year ago. So
yeah, I think the weeds are really beneficial specifically in areas of like data entry. And
Jason's unit might have been a little bit of an exception. A few of the other groups that we've worked with that have done it themselves, it's been not as smooth sailing, and we've gotten better at that. And I think one of the things is making sure you are, for lack of a better word, training other units or someone there, like whoever's going to be overseeing things. So whether that's like, an entire group of 12 people or, somebody key there, whether they have a graduate student or an administrative person or somebody whose role it is to kind of oversee it. And the reason why I'll say that is because your quality of data, right? Like there's a lot of things, there's room for interpretation in some of the fields that are within Collaboratory, right? So to the extent that you can kind of think about it like a research project and wanting to make sure that, everybody has the same understanding of the concepts and the terms, you're going to want to make sure that you help them work through that so that you're all on the same page and you can feel pretty good about the integrity of the data on the back end.
CRM or community engaged learning course software, and how might these kind of work together?
So, Quasi, were you going to say something?
No, getting defer to you.
Yeah, so this is the only tool that the Office of Outreach and Engagement has, like that's like housed there to use. However, all of the units that we're working with have, well, I shouldn't say all of them, many of them have their own systems, right? Whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or it's a CRM or it's a database or something like that. And part of what we have done with groups like Jason's, like Jason shared the spreadsheet. They have a great tracking spreadsheet that his staff uses, right? And so kind of to the data question earlier, our team has access to that spreadsheet and can get data from that. And we often will work with units that are working with Collaboratory to see if there are ways that we can modify or adapt their system to also account for Collaboratory, right? To be more efficient. So we have to go back to them for less data. So for example, Jason and I have talked about a couple things that aren't on his spreadsheet that we need for Collaboratory, and could we add those in? So we definitely don't discourage folks from using what they're already using. They probably have good reasons for grants or other reasons that they need to be using what they are. And so our goal is like, hey, we've got this other thing that has this relational piece. Let us tap into what you already have that works for you. And in some cases, people have nothing and they're just excited to just use Collaboratory, right? So again, it's a little bit of a mixed bag depending on what unit it is on campus.
Okay, I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. So I'm going to ask another one in the chat. This one around like the detail of data that's being entered. So we've got someone who's curious the level of detail that is being input for the data. So for example, are you putting broad category labels around the activity entries, or are you getting really nitty gritty into the qualitative data? They're trying to determine what type of information they want to enter and are considering like what level of detail when it comes to community engagement activities is maybe best to capture, or what you've chosen to do when you're entering your activities.
Lauren and Katie, I feel like we spent 3 months talking about this every day. You all were so patient with me on this topic. This is a huge issue, and kind of what Jason was getting to, where he was talking about how they have this one event, that's 40 different separate events, and is each one, or do we lump them all together? It is a huge decision point. Again, we have taken the approach, for better or for worse, and maybe 5 years from now we will regret it, of meeting people where they're at. And so we have said to them, why do you want to use Collaboratory? What do you want to use it for, and how do you want to use it? And that helps us figure out how best to put it in. So for example, a faculty member who wants to use Collaboratory to better document their promotion and tenure, we need to take a really detailed approach, right? And put everything in separately, a lot of detail, some supporting evidence, all of that. Then we have people, maybe our engagement, our extension people who do, 300 activities a month. There's no way we have the sustainability or capacity to put all of those in. So we make decisions to lump those together in ways that make sense for them, right? They think in geographic terms in extension, like they're interested in counties. So we group their activities by counties. So I think it just depends. Lauren has like drilled into my head, like granular is always better, more detail is good. And that's definitely our default. But when you really start doing it and somebody says, oh, I did 400 things last month, you can't really be super detailed in that. So it's a little bit of, you just kind of got to see where people are at and what's realistic.
Lauren, can I jump in? I didn't want this question to go unanswered. So Brian Murdoch had asked, has President's Office supported Collaboratory in getting deans